Okay, welcome to this screencast where I'm going to be showing you how to set up Django, a Django project inside of a Docker container for development. So what I'm going to be doing is going to have Pycharm running, connecting to the project inside of a Docker container, and then debugging and showing you basically how you can be productive by having your IDE properly set up so that you can get code completion and all the nice things you expect from a good IDE experience. So we're going to be using Projector for this. I'm going to be using a checkout at a particular hash because the developer's got a problem, but normally you just check out develop and you should be able to follow along. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be since I'm working on Mac, I'm going to make sure that I am in a fresh Docker machine for the project. I've made aliases for my commands, so DM on my system means Docker machine, so wherever you see me typing DM, you know that I'm typing Docker machine. And I just want to show you that I've set up a Docker machine just for this project, for Projector. And I've already pulled into this machine the various images and done a make build. So I'm not explaining the basic stuff about how to get your images built. I'm assuming you've already got that built. The one thing you'll notice is now that we have this Projector dev web, which we never had before, and this is an image which is based on top of Projector UWSG, and it's basically the same as the UWSG, except it doesn't run UWSG as the long-running process. It runs SSH, and we're going to use that to log in as a remote Python interpreter environment. I should point out that this is not secure, so it's not intended for any production use. You're only using this for your development environment. It's using a root login, and it's got a weak password and everything, so it's really just meant for you developing on your local laptop. Okay, so I've got a machine. That machine is active. In Linux, you don't have to basically worry about using a machine. You can just use Docker straight. And then I've built all the images for it already. So I'm going to do make dev web, which will bring up two images for me. So the first is the dev web image container now, and the second is a Postgres container. And I need to have a sample database to work with. So I'm going to do make db restore, which is just a standard make job that we have. And to do that, I made sure that I have the latest dump inside of backups. So now I've got a table populated for my Django project, and I've got an environment which I can log into via SSH. So you'll notice that there's two port mappings here. The one is for SSH port, and the other one is for an HTTP port. So we'll be using those, the first one so that we can log in and run the dev server, and the second is so that we can actually open it in our web browser and test it. So I'm going to log into this machine now. To log in under Mac or Windows where you've got Docker machine, you need to know the IP address of the machine. So I'm going to do Docker machine ls again and just make a note of this this number over here, this IP address, because that's what I have to use when I connect. If you're in Linux, you're just going to SSH to your local host. So it's going to be something, let's just do it as root. Okay, and we're going to specify the port, and we can see the port over here is 61203, 61203. Okay, and the password is just Docker. Okay, so now I'm logged in, and you'll see that it's dropped me into the Django project directory, which is where we normally deploy our Django project. And if I look here, I should see all the standard stuff installed, including development things like let's see, Pylint and Nose and so on. So we've got our production packages and our development packages installed in here. And if I'm lucky, I should be able to just say python manage py run server, and then like that, and it will bring up the server, and we can go and have a look and see if that works by just going to our browser, and we're going to use that Docker machine address. So I'm going to that same IP address, and then 61202, and there you can see the project is up and running inside of our, but running off the dev server. So if we go look again on our shell here, you'll see that over here these are the web requests as they're coming in. So let's make another request here, and you see that you should see, let's see, okay, so there you can see the request for the resources and so on. Okay, but obviously this is useful because we can run server and we can have it running, but it's not very useful for debugging and so on. So what we're going to do next is not run it in that context. I'm going to log out here. I'm going to open Pycharm. And then in Pycharm, what I'm going to do is set up the environment so that we can connect to that remote machine as a remote Python interpreter. So I've already got it set up to open on that project. And then what I'm going to do is go to project settings, command and comma if you're on Mac. Okay, and you'll see that it's using the default system interpreter, but I want to use a remote interpreter, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say add a remote interpreter. It's going to be an SSH interpreter. I'm going to use that same IP address. Just bear in mind, if you stop and start your machine, or if you stop and start Docker machines, the IP address might change. So on Mac and Windows, you need to just check that you've always got the current address in there. And then we're going to use that same port number. So we used over here 61203, so 61203, and then the username is root. It's the same credentials as I used from the command line, and the password is Docker. Okay, and we're going to be using user local in Python. Okay, you can see that if I go to login again here, you can see that it's using user local bin Python as the default interpreter, and that's the one that's going to give us all these nice packages, right? Okay, so I'm going to save that. Okay, so it says, gives us an error message. Now it's a bit buggy, so I'm just going to say okay, and I'm going to go over to tools and go to deployment. I'm going to create a deployment configuration with the same credentials, and then somehow magically it works after doing that. So whoops, I'm going to call it project Docker dev. Okay, and I'm going to do it SFTP. Okay, and then in here I'm going to set those same credentials. So the SFTP host is that 61203, the root path, and then we can do let's see what we're missing. Username we need, root, and the password Docker. And let's test our connection. Okay, it says it's successfully connected. So let's say okay there, and go back to our system settings here. I'm going to go to modify that one that we had, and I'm just going to say okay again, and now it sort of magically fixes itself, and then I'm going to say okay. You'll see at the bottom here that it's it will go and it's finished already, but it goes off and collects skeletons, which are the things that Pycharm uses for syntax completion and so on. Goes and collects those from the remote service, and you'll also notice that it puts in the Django project folder this Pycharm helpers. This should not be versioned under Git, so it should be in your ignore list, what have you. But these inside of here, it puts the eggs for Pycharm's remote debugging and stubs and various other things. Okay, so you just leave that, don't take that away, just make sure it's ignored. I'm just going to again, it's a bit buggy, so I have to restart and restart Pycharm afterwards for it to work properly, I think. So I'm just going to close Pycharm and then open it again. Okay, and now I'm just going to go and look and see if it's sort of picked everything up now. It should be listing all the packages here. It doesn't always do it, and I don't exactly know what the reason is. I'm going to just go do one more thing here and just edit this and give it a nice name. So I'm going to call this project Docker Dev as well. Okay. Again, you get that same irritating message. And it may be just because of the path mappings, and I'll show you what that's about here. So in tools here, tools, deployment configurations, we're going to have path mappings over here. And the purpose of this is to tell it when we reference a file on the local file system, where should it find it on the remote file system. So we can just go in here and it's giving us okay, we're getting an authentication data error. Let's just try and do a test connection quickly. Just because of that, let's see. Okay. Okay, so this is the remote file system I'm looking at now, and we want to tell it that our Django project directory on our local file system maps to this one in home web Django project. Okay. And let's go again and see if it's a bit happier now. Okay. Okay. I'm going to not worry about that error too much because it's sort of, again, like I said, it's a bit buggy. It kind of works, but we just need to keep going and it should all just work. So I'm going to now set up a configuration for the Django project. I should just note that in here, in the, let's find it, Django. I've told Pycharm that I'm working with the Django project, so languages and frameworks here, I've made sure this is on. I've told it where the path is to the actual Django project. I've told it to use dev docker under core settings for the settings file, and so on. So you must make sure that's all set up as well, but otherwise you won't be able to do this step here, which is to set up the Django server. Okay. So now I'm going to set up a Django server, and I'm going to say project server in Docker, something like that. And then the host, now the host is the host that it must be published on. If you use 000, you'll be able to access it from any host. And this is just standard Django stuff, right? So, and I want to publish it on port 8080 because remember here, here I've told it that we're going to be mapping port 8080 from the Docker machine to port 61. So 8080 from inside the container, we're mapping it to port 61202 inside of the Docker machine. And then you'll see there's another option here for mappings. And we're going to go in there. I just want to show you what my Python interpreter is, that it is set to the SSH one. And we're also going to show you, okay, that's fine, I think. So I'm going to do path mappings, and this is exactly the same thing, except now we have to type it manually. So on Mac, it's going to be users to Linux. You're just going to fill this into whatever your settings are. And on the remote side, it's going to be home web Django project. Okay, and make sure you got those mappings right, so that basically when you're debugging, it can match the symbols between what's on your local system and what's on the remote system. Okay. Right, so let's say OK. So if we're lucky, we should be able to just press this button here and it kicks off a shell. Now that shell is running the same like we did when I logged in interactively. It's running inside of the remote interpreter. Let's go and refresh our web page and see if it's all still working. Okay, looking back in here, you can see all the requests have been made. That's great, but we're just doing a run without debug. So the next thing we want to do is actually show you how we can debug it. So I've put a couple of breakpoints in here, one for in the project list view, and I've put one in a template as well. You can only breakpoint, as far as I know, on the template language directives. You can also, I believe, use this to debug the JavaScript running in your project, although I haven't tested it yet and I don't know what the procedure is. Okay, so I've got my breakpoint. I'm going to run, I've killed the run server and I'm going to run it now again in debug mode. Okay. It takes a bit longer to start up in debug mode. Okay, so it's running. We just do the basic test again of refreshing this page. Okay, and you'll see that as it was loading the page now, it's flipped over to the IDE and it's put me in the first breakpoint. And now I can step through my Django code and I can look at any variables. I can use the Python console should work as well. I can look at objects, so let's see what my context looks like. It's saying console not enabled. Okay, I'm not sure why the console is not enabled, but in theory you should be able to use the console, or you should be able to do something like this and say evaluate expression and type context there and then evaluate, and you can see exactly what it is. You've got all the normal debugging facilities available to you. Here's context as well, and you can go and look at every object in the current run context. Okay, and then if we let it run on, we should see that it goes and breaks inside of our template now, at the template breakpoint. And again, you can then just use it to step through and see which parts of your logic flow are being entered into. Okay, so that's a very fast tour of how to get it set up. It is a bit buggy in that, like, when you are setting things up, it doesn't always give you the feedback that you expect it to give you. So you might think it's not working, but it is actually working. So just kind of like, just follow the steps, get it all configured like I've shown. I have found that if I close Pycharm and reopen it, sometimes it sort of magically shows me, for example, all the dependencies in the system. Let's just see if it does it for me now. Okay, so I'm going to go look at my interpreter. Okay, now it doesn't show it, but sometimes it does show it. It should show you all the packages that you've got installed here. Okay. And just bear in mind that if you're on Linux, you don't have to worry about all the Docker machine stuff. So it's a little bit easier in a way, but the Docker machine gives you a nice sort of sense of isolation between projects. So each project can have its own debug environment set up. And when you're done with that, I mean, you can just go and kill your dev web and deploy it as a production environment if you want to test that it also works in the production environment. I hope that's useful for you guys and girls out there who might be wanting to do remote debugging with Pycharm in Docker containers. Thanks for watching.